It's easy to believe in something when you win all the time. The losses are what define a man's faith. It's from this book that I read. A friend of mine said, "Oh, you should read these books." And I did, and I loved them. And I found this quote, and as you all know, quotes kind of stick with me forever, becoming integrated into my life in lots of ways. You see, for me, this is all about this idea of cost. What things cost. And I've never had what I would thankfully call a day like Job. I mean, I think we all know that a lot of the book of Job is pretty much a story about the worst day somebody could possibly have had. I'm not saying I haven't had bad days. I absolutely have had bad days. And to be where I am today, there were things that I have had to lose and things that I've had to give up. I've lost sleep. I've lost time. I've lost so many other things. And I'm not complaining one bit. I would not complain about where I am. I like where I am. I'm happy with where I am. And I mean, how can I complain about something that I was consenting to? I do, however, believe in being real and being honest. I knew before I went into ministry that it was going to be a rather tough road to hoe. And again, I'm not complaining. For as much as I'm equally an optimist and a pessimist at the same time, I'm also a realist, objectively looking at facts and figures and understanding the way the world works. See, but honestly, it's not even just for me that there's a cost in general. Everything costs something in some way, shape, or form. There's always going to be a cost. What is it they always say? There's no such thing as a free meal. And I think that most of us who follow Christ at times feel that cost. And I believe there are times when it's easier to follow Jesus than other times. And that makes perfect sense. When things are up, when you're winning, it's so easy to have your faith. It's easy to do the right thing when everyone agrees with you. It's easy to live your life when everyone is following the same thing. Jesus is wonderful when life is good. But when you're having a hard time, when you have to make hard choices, hard decisions, when you have to give up things that you may really want, well, that's another story altogether, isn't it? You see, I think a lot of people have this misconception about Christianity that once you decide to follow the call of Jesus Christ in your life, everything's fine and Jim dandy, that you live your life just getting everything your little heart desires and this, that, and the other thing. And that's not it. That's not how this works. I mean, you can even see that from the reading from Luke this morning, which I have to say, that's a tough pill to swallow when you read it. The reading from Luke this morning is shocking. It hits us like a coin rocketing towards us at great speeds, doubling us over when we read what Christ is saying. Jesus is attempting to let his would-be followers understand and acknowledge one simple truth. There's a very high, steep cost to discipleship, to following Jesus Christ authentically in your life. It's going to have a cost. Now, there's something that we all need to understand here first. Number one, Jesus was a rather charismatic person, right? People loved to see Jesus. In fact, not just Jesus, but all of the sort of street preachers that were out and about, they would love to watch them. I mean, honestly, what else were people supposed to do at the time? Yeah, they had their work, but most common poor people in that land at that time would not have access to any sort of entertainment. And so these religious figures would become, in a very real sense, this sort of entertainment. And they would watch these charismatic people preach and talk, and sometimes their lives would be changed. But when we see Jesus, we have to ask what it is that he's doing differently. Because he wasn't just talking. No, he's healing people. He's casting out demons. He's got boots on the ground, helping people, walking around. These people are flocking to him because they know about him and what it is that he can do. And so people flocked to Jesus because he was entertaining. And because he was entertaining, in a sense, he was able to tell people these new ideas and these thoughts. This radical new way, this revolutionary idea of how a person can and should relate to God. It's interesting that a version of this speech exists in Matthew's gospel as well. A lot of the Gospels, but primarily Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we call them the synoptic Gospels. There's a lot of overlap between those three in particular. And there is a version of this, but to be honest, it's a little bit nicer. It's a little softer. It's a bit of an easier pill to swallow, if you will. Now, it also has to be said that Luke is not in any way, shape, or form pulling any punches here. Truth is the truth, and hard truths, regardless as to how hard they are the truth. Now, to somebody who's not actively reading the text, it could sound like he's advocating for violence. He uses words like hate. He uses words of abandoning one's own family, picking up your cross and following him. And we know that the cross is not something that is fun. This is a very violent, horrible thing. I'm sure that there are people who take this incredibly literally, that you physically would have to hate your parents or your loved ones much more than Jesus or God. And if you don't, then it's bad for you. I don't think that Jesus wants us to physically get into altercations. I don't think that Jesus wants us to actually hate these people. I think that there's something else going on here. I think that what Jesus is doing is he is using shocking, extreme language to prove his point. Jesus is not saying that family and friends are worthless. In the grand scheme of things, he's being shocking to ask what it is exactly we will replace God with. It's a question that we should ask ourselves today and daily. What are we going to replace God with? The end of August marks a few things. Not only the beginning of fall, the Halloween season, pumpkin spice everything, but also football. We know what will happen, don't we? Because primarily a lot of games are played on Sunday. Have you ever been told that you have to make sure that you get everyone out on time so that you can ensure that people will watch a football game? That's a really weird feeling for a preacher to hear, especially when you're like, I'm pretty sure that God's sovereign over all time. And my joke, when people ask me how long my sermons are, is the sermon is exactly as long as God requires it to be. And yet, we will put things above God. And we do this in small, simple ways. And we don't do it necessarily to be idolatrous people. No, we just do it because that's human nature. See, the fact of the matter is, what Jesus is addressing is the fact that the embracing of Jesus Christ in your life is the sole priority in your life. Are temporary things more important than Jesus? Is something that is going to be here today and gone tomorrow, is that much more important than Jesus? Are we okay with following this Jesus, knowing precisely what it is going to cost us? And that, friends, is the dirty little secret of Christianity. It's not about saying the right words. It's not about showing up once a week and singing songs and doing prayers and other various religious rituals. It is about following Jesus. To illustrate this point, Jesus actually uses examples that cannot in any way, shape, or form be done. You see, in order for the tower builder or the king to do what it is they would do, they would have to have knowledge about the future that it would be very unlikely that they would have. I mean, not every king who knows an army is coming knows exactly how many people are in that army. You have to have information, or building a tower. You have to know ahead of time how big the tower is going to be. And nowhere is that information given. It's just assumed that these people doing these things are going to be able to do it, but it can't be done. So then why would Jesus use it as an example? Well, it's because life, in general, has way too many variables. We cannot plan and know everything that will happen because we just can't. There is no crystal ball that we have. There are no real decks of cards that are going to give us any answers about the future. The main thing about the future is that we just don't know. We can make assumptions. I can assume I know what I'm doing when I'm done here, but that could drastically change. No, we live our lives one day at a time. The only way to be a successful disciple of Jesus in the midst of this chaotic world that we live in is to keep Jesus at the center of all things. That is the point. The focal point, the center of our lives are not ourselves. We are not the center of the universe whatsoever. Instead, that belongs to Christ Jesus. So that's what we try to do. We try our best to live and love like Jesus, and in the back of our minds, following us like some mist wraith, is the cost of it all. Discipleship has a steep and high cost. See, our job is to live like Christ, right? That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. Slap that on a bumper sticker. That'll preach on a Sunday morning. And yet, when you look at Jesus, we know that the world hated him. They will hate you because they hated me first, Jesus even says. Leading us to believe, if we truly want to live like Christ, what does that actually mean? Point to me in the Bible where Jesus had every want and desire and even greeds met. You will not find a more selfless person to have ever existed than Jesus Christ, pouring himself out on the world, dying for the sins of people he never met physically for you and I. And that is the person we are called to emulate. That is the person we are called to be like. If we live like Jesus, and if we radically love as Jesus did, then we're going to run afoul of people in this world. There is no soft way to say it. There is no easy way to put it. You cannot make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And if we want to follow and really take up the mantle of Christian, which means Christ-like, we have to understand all of the implications that that title has for us. Case in point, Onesimus. The letter to Philemon was written to get him to free this slave named Onesimus. Onesimus, while a slave, came to know Jesus via Paul, and Paul has become taken with the young lad and wants him to, continue to help in ministry. And rather than keeping him, Paul does the right thing. Knowing that societal structures and Roman structures exist, he sends him back. He sends him back to Philemon with a letter. Paul writes this letter while he is imprisoned in Rome, and there's a lot of pain and dehumanization going on when people are imprisoned, especially during that time. Slavery further dehumanizes people, turning them not into people, but in objects, as something that people can use. So here's the question. How is Philemon supposed to be comfortable with this? You see, he knows Paul. He likes Paul. And Paul's in prison. And Paul's not having a good time in prison because it's prison. And I have never been in prison, but I don't think it looks fun. I've seen enough TV shows to know that it is not a fun, enjoyable time. How is any Christian supposed to be comfortable with the pain and suffering of marginalized people? The pain of those in prison, the pain of those enslaved by anything that may be enslaving them. Paul is able to understand Onesimus on a very real level. As a prisoner, he too is able to know and to feel what it means to be a marginalized person in society. And because of this, Paul is more than comfortable writing a letter that focuses on repentance. See, the ministry of Jesus is one based on love for marginalized people. We've come to set the prisoner free, after all. If we as a people who follow Jesus are going to be serious about following Jesus, then we need to act like Jesus. And Jesus identified with the marginalized people. He didn't go and come to the earth as a full-fledged human royal. He did not come to the earth in any way, shape, or form as a very powerful-looking, by human standards, person. He was born in a barn. He walked around and talked with people and helped those who had no help. Shepherds were at his birth, the dirty workers, the people that were looked down upon. He ate with the sinner, with the tax collector, with the prostitute. And that didn't make him very popular, did it? It's like when we watch shows and movies where like the cool popular kid hangs out with the sort of loser kid. In high school, if you hang out with quote-unquote the wrong people, that is going to affect your social standing. And Lord knows that's not something you want to do in high school. And yet, when you consistently look at the life of Christ with how he carried himself and what he did, this is exactly what he did. He hung out with those people, with the wrong sort, the troubled people. So back to the original point, if we are to follow Jesus and call ourselves Christian, which again means Christ-like, what exactly does this mean for us? Well, it puts us in a predicament because we are then called to live like Christ. And if we are called to live like Christ, well, then that means we kind of have to do the things that Jesus did. Philemon freeing Onesimus would have cost him more than just a slave. It would have actually cost him a lot of social standing. He'd be swimming uphill against the current of society. It was perfectly fine and legal and morally acceptable in that day to own slaves. So why would he get rid of that? Why would he lose that? And furthermore, why would Paul put Onesimus in that position? And he says this line, this beautiful line. He's like, I'm doing this so that you do the right thing. Because he knows what it's like to be held captive. Not only has he been held captive physically and literally, as he writes this, imprisoned in Rome, but he understands the simple fact of the matter that he was imprisoned by sin as well. He lived a life of bondage. Now, it was not a physical bondage, but a more spiritual, metaphorical bondage. And Christ freed him. He went against society. He went against cultural norms, the way that he was even brought up to follow Jesus, and look where it got him. In jail. And he understands one simple truth and one simple fact, that the only way to obtain freedom is through Jesus Christ. And so he places his faith and trust in God. And he places his faith and trust in Philemon to do the right thing. Oh, that's nerve-wracking. Before I left the house this morning, my wife said, "Be careful." And I said, "I promise you I will be as careful as I possibly can be while driving, but I can't take into consideration what other people are going to do." Which is true. And I got a weird, dirty look from it, but I get those usually every day anyway. But it's true to the point. I can control my actions and my reactions to things, but I can't control what other people do. And there's an amount of putting my faith and trust that other people will do the right thing as well. And that's fine with things like driving, because 9 times out of 10, depending upon where you're driving, of course, most people follow the rules. But when you live in a society that tells you to radically love those people that are not loved by society, it's going to cost you something. It's hard. It's hard to think about what following Jesus really means to us. It's hard for us to think about the cost, and we don't often think about it because we want to focus on the good stuff, right? We want the happy, warm, fuzzy feelings. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you that life was all sunshine and roses, but here's the problem. When you look at the world with rose-colored glasses, all of the red flags just look like flags. Now, am I saying it's a red flag to follow Jesus? Absolutely not. What I'm saying is it's going to make you different, and different is weird. Different is punishable oftentimes by a society that demands conformity. So we don't think about the cost. We focus on the easy stuff. We focus on being victorious in Jesus. Yes, we are. That's great. Think about that. That's wonderful. It's us winning all the time. And it's easy to have faith when you think of the good stuff, salvation, love, grace, all the good stuff that entails. But when things change and when it becomes harder, when you feel the losses that following Jesus gives us, what is it that you are going to do? That, beloved, is what defines our faith. When we look honestly at what following Jesus means to us, we will see what is truly being asked of us. It's not just the relationship with Jesus that defines who and what we are, but the cost of discipleship defines our faith. Amen.